Joining us on the phones right now, it's Congressman Jodey Arrington. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Chad, and good morning, my fellow West Texans. Good to be with you.
Well, glad to have you on the show. Let's start off with DACA. Let's see, the president, I guess it was the attorney general who came out and officially announced that the president had rescinded DACA, and then put the ball in the court of Congress to let y'all decide what happens with the so-called dreamers and DACA. One, do you support the president's decision to rescind DACA? And two, do you think Congress will actually do anything about this?
I'm glad you started on a light note. Listen, and on an easy subject. Here's my take on it. Obviously, we're going to have a lot of work ahead of us to ferret out a good policy and path forward here. First and foremost, the president was right on the money, and Jeff Sessions, I could have said every jot and tittle that he put in his statement, I agree with. It was an unconstitutional action. It was circumventing immigration law, and Obama was a rogue president, and there was too much lawlessness. And here now we have 800,000 DACA people who are, in my opinion, victims of immigration crime and of a lawless president. But we've got to now do something about it, because I will say it's of no fault of their own. They came over here with their parents, and I think we are all reasonable people. We're all sensitive to that, and we've got to do something about it. I think there's some principles that will guide me going forward. Number one is we need to make sure that whatever we do, we also negotiate turning the magnets off, E-Verified, no sanctuary for illegals, federal funding, no catch and release, border security, including walls, fences, etc. That's got to be in this. I see this as an opportunity, okay, in that regard. The other is, I think we're looking at temporary legal status. I don't think it's fair to have people wait in line and others not. So I don't want to reward that. So we've got to do something about putting folks in the back of the line. No criminals, no federal funding, no vote. Pay taxes, work, or go to school. Those are the principles that will guide me, but we're not going to deport them, and we're not going to give them amnesty. And those are the two big parameters. And then all the things I talked about, I think, are subject to debate and discussion with my colleagues. But I'm committed to doing something about it. Trump's right. This is Congress's decision. Obama didn't get that. And we can't have the constitutional republic that is America if you don't respect rule of law. So it's time for Congress, once again, to just act and solve a problem. Unfortunately, one that was laid at our feet on account of, again, a president that circumvented the current law and just basically was, I guess, saw himself as king instead of president.
Well, and you can't have immigration policy that is just an executive action. Immigration policy is a big deal, and it needs to be a legal issue. It needs to be a law that's on the books. That look, no matter who would have won the presidency, no matter which Republican would have won the presidency, the media would be flipping out about what are they going to do about the Dreamers. This way, Congress will actually, hopefully, get something done. Do you actually think, though, that Congress can get something done on this issue, which may encompass not only the Dreamers but immigration overall in 60 days?
In 60 days, that's going to be a quick time frame on it. Given the history of Congress and this dysfunctional institution at times. But I'm committed to leading on this, guys. This isn't something I'm just going to sit back and let happen and then cast a vote. I think Texas, as a border state, should take a lead on border security issues and immigration issues, because we're on the front lines. And I think it's an opportunity for Republicans to show that we're reasonable, we're practical, but we also have deeply held principles. I think you can do all of that, Chad, and I'm going to do. And like I said, I laid all that out. I'm going to work through that those guiding principles, and I will stay close to my folks in the district just because they're I'm their voice, and I want their input in that process as well.
I know you have to get going here in about 15 minutes or so let's do this. Let's go ahead and take the break. And, Congressman, I'm going to ask you to hold over to the next segment. We'll have one more segment with you, okay?
You got it.
All right. We placed him on hold. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Congressman Jodey Arrington here on the Chad Hasty Show, KFYO. On the phones, Congressman Jodey Arrington. Congressman, we may get back into the whole issue of DACA here in a little bit, but I want to get your opinion on the president yesterday. All the headlines that sprung up were Trump stuns the GOP by dealing with the Democrats on the debt ceiling and Harvey aid. The president also hinted that he may work with Democrats if Republicans could not advance his priorities. He's warned that in the past. There were apparently a lot of Republicans who were not too happy with the president's decision to side with the Democrats and take a deal with the Democrats yesterday. What's your view on it?
You mean to tell me that after the Congress had failed, and mainly on account of the Senate and one vote in particular in my mind, and failed at repealing Obamacare, the definitive mandate from the people, that the president would actually, suffer with lack of confidence in the United States Congress? I'm not surprised, and so I'm not surprised that he's taken action like this. It cuts both ways, okay? But I will tell you that my first priority, and I think the president's, is to make sure we get the disaster relief funding in a timely way to our fellow Texans in the Gulf. And right now we're bumping up against this debt ceiling. And if you don't do something temporarily, my understanding, and this is the president's rationale, is that we can't get him that money. Why would we bog that down in the typical Washington politics? I want to have a debt ceiling discussion where we get structural reforms. I'm a budget hawk, and that's why we got $200 billion, the largest in 20 years, mandatory spending cut. However, right now, if I'm not going to play politics, we're getting money to the Gulf, and having this temporary window to suspend or to increase the debt ceiling to do that, I think that's a responsible thing to do, because you're putting safety first. You're putting our fellow Americans who are in a bad way first. And again, it cuts both ways. I'm just glad that you can. We're not going to punt that for a year, because it's important to have the debt ceiling conversation. We've had it 72 times since we passed the law on it. It hasn't worked because we're still $20 trillion and climbing in debt. And so we need to use it for what it was intended to do, and that was to make us pause and look at the debt we've amassed and say, what kind of budget reforms and structural reforms and spending do we need to do in order to save the union? Quite frankly, I say it's the greatest threat to our future, and to not hand this to our kids, a broke and bankrupt country. And that's my biggest worry.
So for you, you're in support of this just because it would help out the state of Texas with Harvey relief.
And let me be clear, and I want every listener to hear this. The president has said that we're bumping up so close to the debt ceiling that you can't get them the $8 billion they need now for emergency operations. So you're going to have to either move it up some, temporarily suspend it for this 3-month window. If that's true, and I believe I'm taking him at his word, then yes, we're not going to play politics. I will vote for that, because those guys need our help. If you don't need to, that is, if we still have capacity to get them the money, I would pull that debt ceiling off of it so we can have a real debate about the fiscal condition of this country and the dire situation we find ourselves in that regard.
Do you worry about the president working with Democrats more in the future on other issues and not listening to Speaker Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. I mean, he basically shut them out of this meeting. You had the Speaker of the House who had said previously that it would be unworkable and ridiculous to do what Trump ended up doing.
Well, let me say a few things about that. Number one, as much as I know some folks think Paul Ryan is Paul Rhino and all that stuff, remember, in May, we got a repeal of Obamacare and a reform over to the Senate. That was no small feat. We did it, and it was McConnell in the Senate that did not get every vote and still lack one. And by the way, they should take a vote every day between now and when reconciliation expires at the end of the month to get that done. That is the linchpin to so much. Now, I can understand why the president's frustrated, and I can understand why he's trying a different tack. Maybe he's trying to wake us up to say, if you don't get your act together, Republican conference, House and Senate, I'm going to go a different route because I'm going to be a president of action, and I'm going to get something done because in this era, I think what people want more than anything is results. And I do think the downside, in all fairness, is if you negotiate with the Democrats on something that they didn't negotiate with us with respect to Obamacare, for example, you're going to have a perpetuation of government-controlled health care, and I'm opposed to that. I don't want to prop up a failing system. So you've got to be careful that if we're going to make 10, 20, 30-yard gains and move towards the conservative constitutional ideals that I stand for and that the people I represent stand for, then I'm for doing whatever it takes to go that direction and make progress. But if we end up just propping up the current systems of big government solutions, man, I'm opposed to it. I don't care who's behind it.
We're visiting right now with Congressman Jodey Arrington. We had a listener on Twitter who wanted to know your thoughts on the Bridge Act offered by Representative Mike Kaufman out of Colorado. According to roll call, it would extend DACA for 3 years. Do you think that's a smart way of going about it, or do we need an overall immigration policy with a clear cutoff date? Maybe not 3 years from now. You talked about magnets earlier. A clear cutoff date of when people were brought into the country, when they could, fall under whatever this immigration reform will look like.
Yeah. First of all, just thinking about your questions earlier, I don't want to call these guys dreamers. My heart goes out to these kids. We need to do something and do the right thing. But by the way, we need to do the compassionate and right thing to the kids that are standing in line right now and going through the legal process and legal channel for immigration. And we need to do the right thing by our kids who are in schools that have limited resources, and we're not getting them all the resources that they could otherwise have. So compassion should extend to Americans first and to those that are abiding by the law first. But and that's why, the American dream is the immigrant coming here and hungry for freedom, hungry for opportunity, and will work hard, fear God, pledge allegiance to the flag and to our Constitution. We're all for that. And so I would just say the American dream is doing it through the legal process. So the DACA kids. We're not going to deport them. We're going to find a temporary legal status for them. But they're going to have to be no criminals, no federal money, no vote. They need to pay taxes. They need to work or be in school, et cetera, et cetera. Again, we're going to flesh this out, Chad. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but we also need to make sure that in this process we lock down stopping illegal immigration and securing our border. That means turning off every magnet, and that means getting every resource for walls and fences, virtual boots on the ground, deportation hearing resources, detention center resources, no more catch and release, no more playing games with securing, with providing security and safety to the American people. We need to fix the immigration legal process where it's broken, and there are plenty of places on that. We need to deal with this 800,000 kids,
right?
And we're going to do that.
Congressman, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
God bless. Thanks.